Imagine a day that starts way before dawn. You're packed shoulder to shoulder with hundreds, maybe thousands of strangers. The air's thick with, I don't know, the smell of diesel and maybe fear. The ship is just constantly lurching, battling these rough seas.
Yeah.
You're already fighting exhaustion, fighting seasickness, and, with every single wave, you're sailing directly into history's largest seaborne invasion.
It's almost impossible to truly picture.
Today, we're doing a deep dive into that exact experience. A single day, June 6th, 1944, in the life of an American G.I. on D-Day.
It really is a moment in history that stands apart, doesn't it? Operation Overlord, it wasn't just, another military plan. It was this colossal undertaking, a monumental gamble, really.
The gamble aimed at what exactly?
Aimed at establishing a crucial permanent foothold in Nazi-occupied France. The goal was ultimately to dismantle Adolf Hitler's regime. And for the American G.I., this day, the single brutal day, well, it was fundamentally a crucible of courage. A test unlike any they had ever faced, or honestly would ever face again.
And that's really our mission today, isn't it, for this deep dive? To try and understand that complex interplay of meticulous, almost unbelievable planning on one hand.
Right.
And then the unforeseen chaos that just erupted, the immense physical strain, the psychological pressure on every single individual, and just the sheer extraordinary human endurance that, in the end, defined the American soldier's experience.
Exactly.
We'll be digging into crucial insights from the sources you've provided, including some really powerful firsthand accounts, trying to put ourselves in their waterlogged boots, so to speak.
Precisely. We're going to really dissect their journey, moment by moment. We need to reveal how the immense challenges they faced often began long, long before the first shots were even fired.
Right, before the enemies was even in sight.
Yeah. We'll trace that harrowing English Channel crossing, the agonizing wait on board, the brutal landing on those heavily defended beaches, and then the immediate desperate fight to secure their objectives further inland. It's a story of human limits just pushed beyond anything you could imagine.
Okay, so to really grasp what these soldiers were up against, we have to start with the sheer scale of D-Day. It's easy to forget just how massive this was.
Oh, absolutely enormous.
When we talk about the cross-channel invasion, we're not just talking about a handful of ships. We are discussing this immense armada, over 7,000 ships and landing craft. And get this, 4,000 of those were specifically designated as landing craft.
4,000, just landing craft.
Manned by over 195,000 naval personnel. It's staggering. And our focus today is on the American forces, primarily heading towards Utah and Omaha beaches.
And the types of vessels they were crammed into, well, it varied quite a bit. Each had its own characteristics and, frankly, limitations. You had the large landing ship tanks, the LSTs.
Right, the big ones.
Yeah, pretty formidable vessels, about 328 feet long. They could carry vehicles, tanks, trucks, and roughly 160 soldiers. Then you had the landing craft infantry, the LCIs, designed for about 200 soldiers, but, in the urgency of D-Day, sometimes packed with nearly double that, up to 388. But the most common, the real workhorse of the invasion, was the 35-foot landing craft vehicle personnel, the LCVP.
The Higgins boat.
Yeah, exactly, the Higgins boat, affectionately known as that. Typically carried a platoon-sized group, about 36 troops. These boats were relatively small, shallow draft, pretty fast, but definitely not designed for comfort, not at all.
And that's where that design paradox becomes so important, like you said, really uncomfortable. These flat-bottomed landing craft, they had those crucial bow ramps, right? Essential for getting troops off quickly onto the beach.
Absolutely critical for speed.
But that very design, the flat bottom, made them very uncomfortable in rough seas. And the control point was usually way at the back, too, which couldn't have helped with stability, could it? How did that lack of stability really impact the soldiers before they even saw the enemy?
You're hitting on a really critical point there. It was a fundamental design compromise. And the English Channel on June 5th, the night before the invasion, it was anything but calm. We're talking sustained winds, 14 to 20 knots. Waves reaching 4, maybe even 6 feet high.
That's significant in a small boat.
Absolutely. And those conditions, combined with the flat bottoms of the vessels, led to, widespread seasickness, just pervasive. They were tightly packed into these assault landing craft, often sitting with their heads below the gunwale, strict orders, minimize exposure, keep the silhouette low.
Right.
And the heavy seas, they didn't just cause motion sickness, they frequently cascaded right over the hulls and the blunt bows, just drenching the troops to the skin. And this is before they even began their final run towards the shore. They were battling the elements long before they battled the Germans.
And it wasn't just getting drenched. I read that while some American craft had bilge pumps, a lot of the British ones didn't have them at all.
That's right.
Imagine that, soldiers having to bail water out with their helmets, just using their helmets to keep the craft afloat through the night. It's incredible.
And tragically, the channel claimed lives even before the Beaches did. Some of these landing craft, they just couldn't handle the rough seas. They succumbed, they sank before ever reaching the beach. A truly harrowing, often unseen start to an already perilous journey for the poor men aboard those specific craft.
So this cramped transport, it was way more than just being uncomfortable, wasn't it?
Oh, far more. It was, in essence, a debilitating prelude to battle. Just think about it. Many GIs were physically exhausted, they were nauseated, they were soaked to the bone before they even encountered enemy fire.
Yeah.
This pre-combat physical degradation, it profoundly impacted their immediate combat effectiveness the second they landed. It fundamentally reduced their stamina, their ability to focus clearly, their capacity for quick, decisive action, things absolutely critical in the chaos of a beach assault.
So they were landing already compromised.
Exactly. It added this huge layer to the already immense psychological burden of the invasion. Just try to imagine starting the most important life or death mission of your entire life already physically grained, battling this internal enemy like seasickness, even before you've laid eyes on the actual foe. That would break most people, wouldn't it?
Okay, so the journey itself was already this agonizing test of endurance.
Right.
And then came the news that just intensified everything. D-Day, initially set for June 5th.
Right.
It was delayed by 24 hours because of the bad weather. Now, that decision, strategically necessary, I get it, but it must have just amplified the tension and frustration among troops already staged on their vessels, right? Trapped in that cramped, seasick reality, just left to stew in their apprehension for another whole day.
General Eisenhower, he understood the immense stakes involved. He delivered this really powerful address to the Allied Expeditionary Forces on June 6th. He acknowledged the formidable challenge ahead, saying, "Your task will not be an easy one. Your enemy is well-trained, well-equipped, and battle-hardened. He will fight savagely." Clear-eyed about the enemy.
Didn't pull any punches.
No. But at the same time, he instilled confidence. Declared, "I have full confidence in your courage, devotion to duty, and skill in battle. We will accept nothing less than full victory." Powerful words.
Yeah.
But what's really poignant, and it's often overlooked, is that lesser-known detail that Eisenhower famously prepared a failure message, just in case the invasion faltered or failed completely.
Really? He wrote a failure speech.
He did. It was a single stark paragraph accepting full responsibility. It just underscores the immense stakes and the inherent uncertainty of the whole undertaking. This was a mission where absolute success was the only acceptable outcome, but the possibility of devastating failure was a very real, very haunting shadow hanging over everything.
Wow. You can just feel that immense weight on everyone, can't you? From Eisenhower at the top right down to the newest private. And veterans coped in different ways, very human ways.
Yep.
Like Daniel McBride of the 101st Airborne. He'd actually enlisted specifically to overcome his fear of heights, which is amazing in itself. He vividly recalled asking his lieutenant right before his jump, is this just another dry run or the real McCoy?
That need to know.
Yeah. That collective need to know to finally confront the inevitable. Soldiers resorted to cracking gags, forced laughter, this kind of gallows humor,
The coping mechanism.
Totally. And a collective sentiment. Basically, okay, if this is it, let's get in there and get it over with. Almost like confronting the terrifying reality was better than just prolonging the anxiety. One soldier even described mentally rehearsing his briefing, writing it down in my head like a record and kept playing over and over again. Just a desperate attempt to gain some semblance of control over this uncontrollable fear.
And that's where it gets fascinating, how these individual responses, they collectively illustrate this profound human capacity for courage. Veteran Maupin of the 29th Infantry Division, he articulated this so powerfully. He said, "Everybody was afraid. I doubt there was a soldier during the war that wasn't afraid. That's inherent in human beings when your life is in danger. Simple truth."
Yeah.
But then he went on to define courage, not as the absence of fear, because that, he said, is just unrealistic, but as overcoming fear and acting and doing your job in spite of your fear.
That's it.
And that fundamentally challenges any simplistic notions of heroism you might have, right? These GIs weren't fearless supermen. They were acutely aware of their mortality. Their bodies were often already failing them from seasickness, from the cold, from exhaustion. But they pushed through that terror, driven by discipline, by training, and by this powerful, almost primal sense of loyalty to their comrades, to their unit.
And that camaraderie, that must have been absolutely crucial, right? One American soldier noted, Around the third day out, things got pally. Like the fella said, hell, we're all in the same boat. Literally. It really illustrates how that shared vulnerability fostered this strong sense of unity, of mutual reliance. It's hard to imagine enduring that psychological and physical ordeal alone.
It's true. And they tried to combat the seasickness, of course, with whatever they had. Some soldiers got anti-seasickness pills, but for many, they were just ineffective or just induced extreme drowsiness, which is the absolute last thing you want right before an invasion.
Yeah, not ideal.
Not ideal at all. Others, in desperation, resorted to using their helmets as vomit bags. A truly grim image, but a necessary adaptation for survival in those conditions. And this shared, often miserable experience of fear and seasickness, it likely strengthened those bonds profoundly. It made the collective mission and that mutual reliance a more potent motivator than individual terror. It really transformed personal fear into collective resolve. So think about it. How do humans find the strength to act, to perform their duties, not because they're fearless, but precisely because they are terrified? And they do it for the people standing right beside them.
Okay, so beyond the seasickness, beyond the mounting apprehension, there was the sheer physical burden, just the weight of what they carried. American G.I.s were loaded down with full combat equipment that could easily exceed 70 pounds. Some sources even say their backpacks alone weighed anywhere from 70 to 100 pounds.
It was a staggering load, truly staggering, and every single ounce mattered in that situation. Let's break down some of that standard gear, beyond just their primary weapon.
Like the M1 Garand.
Yeah, the semi-automatic M1 Garand rifle, or the bolt-action M1903 Springfield for some, the Browning automatic rifle BAR for support gunners, the Colt M1911A1 pistol for officers and others. Beyond those, they had their M1 helmet for ballistic protection. Often 2 first aid kits strapped somewhere, a partly inflated life preserver, which turned out to be critical or deadly.
I bet that.
Yeah. A dark olive drab combat jacket, that herringbone twill cotton designed for wet and cold conditions, and an M5 assault gas mask, because the threat of gas warfare was still very real in their minds. All of that added up, not just in sheer weight, but in bulk. It just restricted movement significantly.
And this immense weight became a critical liability almost immediately, didn't it? Especially during the landing phase. Soldiers were often forced to wade, sometimes swim in frigid water under enemy fire, sometimes for hundreds of yards if they were dropped short. Those waterlogged pant legs, for instance, just filled with cold seawater, they became incredibly heavy, leading to rapid exhaustion, making running on the beach, if you could even run, incredibly difficult.
It's almost like you're fighting the enemy, but you're also fighting your own survival gear at the exact same time.
And that's where this raises a really important question, doesn't it? How did gear designed for combat on land become such a deadly threat in the water? The tragic reality is that many soldiers drowned under the weight of their bulky combat gear, just straight up drowned.
Yeah, often due to insufficient instruction on how to properly use their life jackets, or maybe the life jackets themselves weren't adequate for that much weight. Or simply because they were dropped into water that was too deep for their laden bodies, perhaps hitting an unexpected sandbar or a channel. It highlights this fundamental paradox of amphibious assault. The very equipment essential for the land battle, for protection, for effectiveness, once you're on the beach, it became a potential death trap in the water. A critical design flaw, you could argue, for that initial, most vulnerable phase of the invasion. There was this desperate trade-off between preparing for the fight on land and just surviving the journey to get there.
And it wasn't just the drowning risk, as horrific as that is. There was something more subtle, but also devastating. While the wet clothing itself posed apparently a low risk of hypothermia while static in mild cold air, it critically reduced finger temperatures. It caused considerable dexterity concern.
Yeah.
Just imagine trying to reload an M1 Garand's on-block clip with numb, freezing hands. Or clearing a jam under intense fire.
The implications of that are profound. In the chaos of a firefight, fine motor skills are absolutely paramount. For reloading quickly, for clearing weapon jams, for aiming accurately, for operating other critical equipment like grenades or maybe communications gear if you had it.
Right.
Impaired dexterity due to cold and fatigue would directly compromise a soldier's ability to effectively use their weapons and respond to threats. It could potentially lead to increased casualties, reduced combat effectiveness overall. It truly acted as this silent, insidious enemy alongside the German defenders, diminishing their fighting capability from within, from the cold and the wet.
But even in that desperate situation, there was ingenuity, wasn't there? A kind of desperate resourcefulness among the ranks. Soldiers using condoms to protect their rifle barrels from sand and water.
Yeah, it sounds odd, but it was practical. Waterproofing.
and plyofilm rifle covers for waterproofing weapons during the channel crossing itself. Just trying to stack the odds in their favor, however small, against every possible challenge. Think about it. Trying to fight for your life, your body already exhausted, your hands numb, your every movement a struggle against the very weight of your own survival gear. That's the physical reality they faced even before landing. Okay, as if the channel crossing wasn't enough to put their senses on absolute high alert, those final hours before landing were just a complete sensory maelstrom. At precisely 5 a.m. on June 6th, just 90 minutes before H-hour.
90 minutes.
Naval forces initiated this massive pre-landing bombardment, hitting the American beaches, Utah and Omaha, and inland targets too. Simultaneously, something like 11,600 Allied aircraft launched attacks across the invasion area. It was meant to be this overwhelming show of force, right? A terrifying overture to the invasion.
Oh, absolutely. And from the soldiers' accounts, the auditory experience was truly deafening. A sound that would just be seared into their memories forever. They described the big battleships having opened up a heavy bombardment. The air is absolutely full of planes. All I can hear is bang, crash, bang, crash. Constant. The noise was so intense that 10-ton salvos from battleships like the HMS Rodney would almost shatter your ears. It was this continuous bone-rattling roar, an experience utterly beyond normal human comprehension. Imagine feeling the concussion of those shells even through the steel deck of your landing craft, just vibrating through your entire body.
Visually, the spectacle must have been immense. The coastline, the villages, apparently completely obscured by smoke and flames, just a thick roiling curtain of destruction. Pilots flying overhead observed tremendous puffs of smoke and felt the shockwaves from explosions of one-ton shells hitting their targets below. What's really remarkable, though, is that despite this massive Allied air and naval presence, this total dominance of the skies and seas, there was apparently not one German plane to be seen, which must have created this initial, maybe comforting sense of overwhelming Allied air superiority.
Well, and what's fascinating here is how that overwhelming display almost certainly provided crucial psychological reassurance to the troops crammed onto those transports. It fostered a belief, maybe a desperate hope, that the German defenses were being significantly softened, perhaps even obliterated.
You'd want to believe that.
You absolutely would. The visible smoke and flames and the conspicuous absence of any ear's air response would have strongly reinforced this perception of overwhelming Allied power. However, and this is a big however, later accounts, particularly for Omaha Beach, reveal a stark and brutal reality. The bombardment was largely ineffective. It failed to knock out strong defense points, mostly because bombers, worried about hitting their own landing craft approaching the shore, released their bombs too late, overshooting the beach defenses entirely. This highlights this critical disconnect between the perceived effectiveness, what the soldiers saw, and the brutal reality awaiting the G.I.s on the beaches. A classic, devastating example of the fog of war. They thought they were landing on a pulverized beach. Many were not.
And it wasn't just sight and sound overwhelming them. There's a sense that's often neglected in war narratives, but it's incredibly primal, incredibly impactful smell. Veterans describe this pervasive odor of oil and high explosives and burning things. One recalled an acrid taste right in your mouth, almost as if they were chewing on the air itself.
And this intensified dramatically as they got closer, and certainly once they landed on the beaches. The smells grew to include burning vehicles, rubber, ammunition, belts, packs, uniforms, human flesh, all giving off awful smells. Just horrific. This stresses that the sensory experience was profoundly multifaceted, deeply immersive. Smell is such a primal sense, right? Directly linked to memory and emotion. And these sickening, pervasive odors of battle would have contributed significantly to the traumatic and unforgettable nature of the experience, embedding the horror in a visceral, unforgettable way. So, how do our perceptions, especially in moments of extreme anticipation, sometimes fail to prepare us for the harsh realities that await? And how do our senses themselves become instruments of trauma?
So as the landing craft plowed through those choppy waves, getting closer and closer to the beaches, especially Omaha, the tension inside must have been just absolutely unbearable. Soldiers inside could already hear it, right? The telltale sound of machine gun rounds striking the raised ramps.
Ping, ping,
Ping. Yeah, a terrifying, ominous prelude to what awaited them. A sound that surely triggered just a primal fear.
And then, at precisely 6:30 a.m. H-hour, the moment of truth arrived. The ramps were lowered. And in that instant, those tightly packed troops who'd been huddled for hours in the cramped pitching boats, they were instantly exposed to the fury of the German machine guns.
Just Immediate.
Immediate. Private Harry Parley of the 16th Infantry Regiment chillingly described this moment as becoming a visitor to hell. The carnage was immediate and indiscriminate. Many of the first men to exit the landing craft were instantly slain by machine guns, positioned to have interlocking fields of fire just cut down before they could even hit the water or the sand. Their lifeless bodies, heavy with all that gear, simply toppled into the water, becoming grotesque obstacles themselves for the men coming right behind them.
And in that moment of absolute horrifying terror,
Yeah.
desperate choices were made, weren't they? Some soldiers, instead of exiting the front into that wall of fire, chose to jump overboard from the sides, trying to escape the direct, murderous fire coming straight down the ramp.
Again.
But in doing so, they only faced this harrowing life and death struggle to keep their heads above water because of the immense weight of their equipment. Tragically, many, many more drowned this way, compounding the loss of life before they even reached the shore.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it really reveals this critical confluence of tactical and environmental failures that turned Omaha, especially, into such a slaughterhouse. Landing craft often dropped troops too far out due to hidden sandbars or just the difficulty of precise navigation under intense fire. And soldiers were inadequately prepared for deep water egress with those heavy loads, so that desperate act of jumping overboard and attempt to escape the direct fire often led to an equally deadly fate in the cold, deep water. The combination of ineffective preliminary bombardment, the accurate German interlocking fire, and the sheer physical burden of waterlogged gear. It created this perfect, deadly trap.
The noise on the beach itself must have been just deafening, a cacophony that defied description. Veterans recalled explosions all around us in the sea, and shells and mortars kicking up sand all over the beach. The continuous rapid fire of their own boats' guns, trying to provide cover, deafened us.
Yeah.
Photojournalist Robert Capa, who landed with the first waves, he captured this visceral reality, stating that his beautiful France looked sordid and uninviting, and a German machine gun spitting bullets around the barge fully spoiled my return. Just blunt reality. And to add to the horror, the water was awfully cold, adding another layer of physical shock and discomfort to the terror.
Veteran accounts from those first few minutes, they just confirm that nothing went quite as planned. Everything took longer than expected, and his landing craft was taking on a lot of water. Landing craft were exploding all around me. This abrupt, violent shift shattered any lingering illusions of a clean, swift landing. It replaced anticipation with raw, immediate terror and utter chaos. The landing zone instantly transformed into exactly what the Germans intended, a killing zone. So think about it. What does it mean for meticulously laid plans, rehearsed countless times, to just disintegrate in mere seconds, leaving only chaos in this desperate primal struggle for mere survival?
Omaha Beach. The name alone just conjures these images of unimaginable horror, and for very good reason. It truly earned its grim reputation as the most heavily defended of all the D-Day assault areas. It bore the brunt of the bloodiest fighting, resulting in the highest casualties of any landing site that day. Approximately 2,400 U.S. casualties on June 6th alone. Just staggering losses that defied all the pre-invasion expectations.
And the German defenses there, they weren't just present, they were formidable, meticulously constructed, taking full advantage of the natural terrain, the bluffs overlooking the beach. They included concrete gun emplacements strategically positioned for flanking fire, what they call enfilading fire.
So they could shoot down the line of the beach?
Exactly. Rake the entire beach. There was a 15-foot deep V-shaped anti-tank ditch further back, concrete walls in places, extensive barbed wire entanglements laced with mines, hidden ditches, all designed to funnel attackers and cover the open beach. And underwater, the obstacles were terrific. Masses of six-pronged spiders made of railroad iron, huge logs with teller mines attached, positioned just beneath the surface at high tide to rip open and destroy landing craft. They had transformed that beach into a carefully engineered killing ground.
And compounding this, the Allied failures were critical and absolutely devastating there. The preliminary bombardments, like we said, from ships and aircraft, failed to knock out strong defense points. Why? Because U.S. bombers, concerned about hitting their own incoming troops, overshot their targets, dropping their payloads miles inland.
Yeah, a fatal error in judgment.
Resulting in little to no damage to beach defenses. So instead of landing on softened targets, the G.I.s faced fully intact, fully manned German strongholds. And to make matters even worse, many U.S. landing craft tragically ran aground on hidden sandbars far from the beach, forcing soldiers to wade through that frigid water under intense fire, or they became stuck on those underwater obstacles by the incoming tide, unable to clear them, just becoming sitting ducks.
And what's fascinating here in a grim way is how the unexpected presence of the experienced German 352nd Infantry Division significantly contributed to this fierce, highly effective resistance. This division had recently reinforced the coastal units, adding this level of veteran opposition that Allied intelligence simply hadn't anticipated.
They weren't supposed to be there.
They weren't expected in that strength, no? The severity of the casualties was so dire, the situation so desperate in those first hours, that Allied commanders, including General Omar Bradley overseeing the American landings, even seriously considered pulling the troops back from Omaha Beach altogether and diverting subsequent waves to other sectors, like Utah or the British beaches.
Oh, wow. Abandoning the beachhead.
It was considered because the German defenses were specifically designed for that enfilading fire, turning the entire landing zone into a pre-planned, inescapable killing zone. This wasn't just bad luck on Omaha, it was this catastrophic convergence of intelligence failures, planning deficiencies, maybe over-optimism, and truly formidable enemy preparation.
The initial landing was quickly described by participants as just a mess. Landing craft and individual units became completely mixed up and blended together due to missed landings, the strong currents, and the sheer chaos. Men often landed hundreds of yards from their designated exit points, rendering any pre-briefed intelligence about specific objectives or terrain utterly useless in that moment.
Yeah.
Naval Combat Demolition Units, the NCDUs, these specialized teams, trained to clear underwater obstacles under fire. And the scouts and raiders, who were essentially amphibious reconnaissance and assault forces meant to clear the way. They faced devastating casualty rates, over 50% in some cases, just wiped out.
The brutal physical and emotional toll was immense, almost beyond comprehension. Soldiers fought through waist-deep water under continuous, relentless fire. Their water-filled pant legs adding significant weight, leading to extreme exhaustion. That heavy combat gear, 70, 80, 100 pounds, compounded the risk of drowning. And the awfully cold ocean water intensified discomfort and fear, draining their body heat, sapping their strength.
What did it look like?
The scene was one of total chaos, littered with men's bodies everywhere, with wounded men crying both in the water and on the shingle, that strip of coarse sand and pebbles just above the high water mark. Emotionally, soldiers were terrified and demoralized. Some were heard screaming, "They're leaving us here to die like rats." Combat medics, like retired Army Master Scout Charles Shea, Penobscot tribal member, found it very difficult seeing so many dead, needing to actively clear my mind from everything, what I was seeing, and do the work that I was trained to do.
Just compartmentalized to survive.
Exactly. Survivors were pinned down right on the water's edge by an inhuman wall of fire from the bluff for agonizing hours, digging makeshift foxholes in the sand with their hands or helmets, while high officer casualty rates led to leaderless, fragmented groups adding to the confusion and paralysis.
And visually, what they witnessed was horrifying. The beach became this gigantic and pitiful litter of wreckage. Submerged tanks, overturned boats, burned trucks, destroyed jeeps. But the most haunting sight, by all accounts, was the bodies of fellow soldiers. Some in rows covered with blankets on the shingle, others floating in the water, dead, washing in and out with the tide. Auditorily, the beach sounded like a beehive with the bullets flying around, punctuated by the constant roar of machine gun and shell fire. And the cries of wounded added to that horrifying symphony of the battlefield.
This extreme sensory overload, it contributed to a deeply traumatic, disorienting, and dehumanizing experience for those who survived. The breakdown of unit cohesion due to missed landings and the sheer overwhelming scale of death profoundly impacted survivors' psychological state, leaving indelible marks. It underscores the immense mental burden of operating in such an environment, highlighting the long-term psychological scars D-Day would leave on a generation. So you have to ask, how did this confluence of tactical miscalculations, formidable defenses, and environmental challenges create such a disproportionate level of carnage in one specific location? And what does that say about the fragility of even the most meticulously planned military operations?
Okay, so in stark contrast to that bloody gauntlet of Omaha, let's turn our attention westward to Utah Beach. This was the westernmost American assault area. And here, the overarching objective for the U.S. Army ground forces was the swift capture of the vital port of Cherbourg, a crucial logistical prize for the Allies, needed to supply the invasion.
Critically, the relative success of the seaborne assault at Utah was largely thanks to the preceding parachute and glider assaults by the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions.
The Screaming Eagles and the All-American.
Exactly. They dropped behind enemy lines shortly after midnight, hours before the beach landings even began. Their missions were absolutely vital: securing the causeways and exits leading inland from the beach, clearing paths through the marshlands behind the beach, and capturing key towns like Sainte-Mère-Église.
Right, the first town liberated.
That's the one. Now, despite unpredictable weather and scattered drops that saw paratroopers landing miles from their intended zones, some even landed right in the flooded marshes and drowned thousands, persevered and succeeded. They helped clear an inland path and essentially laid the groundwork for the G.I.s hitting the beaches later. Their sacrifice and efforts greatly diminished the resistance the beach troops would eventually face.
And this is where it gets really interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because the main seaborne landing by the U.S. 4th Infantry Division had this genuinely fortuitous navigational error.
Yeah, a mistake that worked out.
Strong currents swept the first wave approximately 2,000 yards. That's over a mile south of their intended target zone. What initially seemed like a massive miscalculation turned out to be, well, a stroke of incredible luck.
This mistake proved immensely beneficial. Why? Because the actual landing area, 2,000 yards south, it turned out it was more lightly defended. And crucially, it contained fewer obstacles than the original objective point further north. German coastal defenses at Utah were just comparatively lighter than at Omaha. They relied more heavily on the natural barrier of the marshlands and flooded areas behind the beach as a primary defense, rather than extensive concrete fortifications and minefields right on the beach itself. So the G.I.s were essentially stepping onto a less lethal piece of coastline, purely by chance.
And the teams on the ground were swift to capitalize on this unexpected advantage, weren't they? Navy Seabees, those Naval Combat Demolition Units again, the NCDUs, and U.S. Army engineers played a vital, often unsung role, clearing and destroying German barriers both in the water and on the beaches, often under heavy fire, but less intense than Omaha.
Significantly less intense.
Within an hour of landing, they had cleared obstacles and neutralized the immediate German defenses, ensuring safer passage for the follow-up waves of troops and critical equipment.
And what's fascinating here, and a real testament to leadership, is Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt Jr.'s critical on-the-spot decision. He was Assistant Division Commander of the 4th Infantry Division, son of the former president, and famously, the only general to land with the first wave that day.
Walked with a cane, right? Arthritis.
Yeah, severe arthritis, heart condition, but insisted on going ashore first. Despite the significant deviation from the plan, he personally surveyed the situation, saw the lighter defenses compared to where they should have been, and made the bold, decisive call. We'll start the war from right here. He basically said, commence the attack from this point.
Amazing.
It highlights the power of adaptable leadership in the chaos of battle, taking initiative when plans inevitably go awry. It was a pivotal moment of leadership that avoided compounding the initial navigational error. He turned a mistake into an opportunity.
And as a result of all these combined factors, the airborne support, the lucky mislanding, the lighter defenses, the rapid engineering work, and Roosevelt's leadership, the rapid consolidation at Utah was remarkable. By noon, troops from the beach had successfully linked up with elements of the 101st Airborne Division inland. And by late afternoon, significant progress had been made, pushing several miles inland towards their objectives.
Yes, Utah experienced relatively low casualties, maybe around 200 to 589 killed, wounded, or missing. A stark contrast to the devastating losses at Omaha. Now, while luck certainly played a role with that mislanding, its success was fundamentally a result of effective synergy. Synergy between the airborne forces preparing the inland routes, the seaborne troops hitting the beach, and the engineering forces rapidly clearing those obstacles.
And leadership.
Amplified by flexible, decisive leadership that capitalized on unexpected advantage. It demonstrated how vital it is for commanders to be able to adjust plans quickly, maintain offensive tempo, and integrate different combat elements effectively. So it makes you think, how can an unforeseen circumstance, an initial failure or mistake, turn into a significant tactical advantage? And what does that say about the unpredictable nature of warfare and the crucial importance of adaptable, on-the-spot leadership?
Okay, so the landing itself, as brutal as it was, particularly on Omaha, was really only the first step, wasn't it? Albeit the most harrowing one. The overarching strategic objective of D-Day, the whole operation known as Overlord, was far grander.
Much bigger picture.
It was to gain a crucial and, importantly, sustainable foothold in Nazi-occupied France. This was seen as the only way to enable Allied forces to eventually push eastward into Central Europe, open that vital second front in the West that Stalin had been demanding for years.
And relieve pressure on the Soviets.
Exactly, and ultimately dismantle Adolf Hitler's regime.
For the American forces specifically, Those high-level strategic aims translated into incredibly ambitious, almost daunting, immediate tactical objectives for the moment their boots hit the sand. For Omaha Beach, despite the fierce resistance they encountered, the primary goal was still to secure a beachhead about 8 kilometers, roughly 5 miles deep.
5 miles on day one.
That was the plan. Link up with the British landings at Gold Beach to their east, and reach the area of Isigny to the west to connect with the American 7 Corps landing at Utah Beach. The plan even stipulated clearing the beach defenses within an impossibly optimistic 2 hours H+2 and opening those vital exit draws, the ravines leading off the beach, by 3 hours H+3 to allow heavy vehicles, tanks, trucks to move off the exposed beach.
Which just didn't happen on Omaha.
Not even close. On Utah Beach, the immediate objective was similarly critical, but maybe more focused geographically. It was to facilitate the rapid capture of that vital port of Cherbourg by the U.S. 7th Corps. This involved securing the 4 causeways leading inland from the beach. These were the only viable routes through the extensive flooded marshlands that the Germans had intentionally flooded to further defend the coastline. Without control of those causeways, the entire advance from Utah would be paralyzed.
And of course, we have to reiterate the indispensable, almost sacrificial role of the airborne troops in achieving these initial objectives.
Absolutely critical.
They were tasked with securing the flanks of the whole invasion area, seizing those critical causeway exits before the beach landings even happened, and capturing key towns like Saint-Mary-Glise, thereby clearing obstacles and preparing the way for the seaborne assaults. We also can't forget the 2nd Ranger Battalion's highly specialized and famously dangerous mission at Pointe du Hoc.
Climbing those cliffs.
Scaling sheer 100-foot cliffs under fire to neutralize a battery of powerful German heavy artillery that posed a direct threat to ships supporting both Omaha and Utah beaches. By the end of D-Day, despite the immense challenges and the staggering losses in some areas, Allied forces had managed to establish beachheads at all 5 landing sites: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, and Sword.
A foothold was gained.
Yes. So what this all means, really, is that high-level strategic necessity, the urgent need to establish a viable foothold before German reinforcements could fully react and potentially throw them back into the sea, it translated directly into immediate life-or-death combat goals for the individual G.I. right there on the ground. These objectives often necessitated extreme tactical risks, pushing men into seemingly suicidal actions against fortified positions. It makes you think, how do those grand strategic aims, decided by generals looking at maps and distant headquarters, depend entirely on the minute-by-minute, often improvisational and incredibly brave actions of individual soldiers caught in the absolute chaos of battle? Okay, let's revisit Omaha's brutal reality one more time. Troops were pinned down right on the water's edge by an inhuman wall of fire from the bluff for agonizing hours. Instead of the planned few minutes, it was a complete mess from the start, just a nightmare of stalled progress and rapidly mounting casualties.
The disorganization was rampant, and it was devastating. Like we said, many units were completely blended together due to mislandings and the sheer intensity of the fire. This forced soldiers from different divisions, even different companies who'd never met, to improvise and combine efforts just to achieve constantly shifting objectives, or simply to survive. German artillery continuously hampered both the initial and subsequent landings, keeping the pressure relentless and preventing any coherent movement off the beach for hours. The original plan had completely, utterly unraveled.
So what was the turning point? How did they finally break through? You mentioned naval gunfire earlier.
Yes, that crucial turning point, that first real crack in the beach defenses, it ultimately came from horrific and wonderful naval gunfire, as soldiers described it. American destroyers, in an incredibly brave and desperate act, famously ran into dangerously shallow water, ignoring the huge risk of mines and sandbars, to engage German emplacements point blank. They were delivering direct fire on targets nobody else could reach, targets that were holding up the entire advance. It was an act of pure desperation by those Navy ships that, quite literally, helped turn the tide on Omaha.
So once that really heavy fire from the destroyers subsided, offering maybe a brief respite, what happened then?
Well, officers and NCOs, many having to step up and improvise leadership because so many commanders were hit, they started reorganizing their men, pulling together whoever was near them, regardless of unit. They then pushed inland, often circling machine gun nests and taking them from the rear, using the cover of the bluffs or smoke. As one officer famously noted, the mindset became, the only way to take a beach is to face it and keep going. It is costly at first, but it's the only way.
Just grim determination.
Sheer grim determination. It reflects what was required to break that stalemate. The initial pinning down of forces on Omaha, completely contrary to all the meticulous planning, it actually revealed this extraordinary capacity for improvisation and just sheer will among the American G.I.s. They were exhausted, they were terrified, many were leaderless, yet somehow they found the strength to move forward.
And the engineers played a role here too, didn't they? Getting paths cleared.
Absolutely. U.S. Army engineers played a critical, though often overlooked, role. They struggled under heavy fire to remove those beach obstacles, the hedgehogs, the Belgian gates, and crucially, to blast open paths and build passable roads through the bluffs and ravines. This enabled vital troops and eventually some equipment to move off the exposed beach and start seizing the fortified German positions inland. Their efforts, often despite lacking heavy equipment in those crucial early hours, were absolutely vital in ensuring the invasion's eventual costly success at Omaha. This collective, decentralized adaptation, it was driven by a primal need for survival and a deep commitment to the mission, even when leadership was gone. It wasn't explicitly planned, but became a critical factor in eventually breaking through those formidable German defenses. The ability of these bloodied but incredibly determined troops to simply stand up and go through, after hours of being pinned down, even when lacking expected armor support, which mostly sank offshore, it underscores this profound resilience. It suggests that while strategic planning and combined arms are essential, the ultimate success in moments like that often hinges on the unforeseen and indomitable spirit of the individual soldier to overcome seemingly insurmountable odds.
So by the end of D-Day, where did things stand on Omaha?
By the end of June 6th, U.S. forces at Omaha had captured and liberated some of their initial objectives. Towns like Vierville, Saint Laurent, Calville-sur-Mer became famous names. But it was at tremendous cost. Many final objective points for the day were not reached. The beachhead was shallow, tenuous, leaving the troops bloodied, and, frankly, lacking the strength to push much further immediately. It really makes you wonder, what allows individuals to stand up and go through after hours of being pinned down, facing those seemingly insurmountable odds and horrific losses, when every fiber of their being must be screaming otherwise?
Now, in stark contrast to those bloody, hard-won advances at Omaha, the landing at Utah Beach, as we touched on, saw a much quicker and far more organized push inland. It's almost like two different battles were being fought side by side on the same day.
It truly was a different experience, almost night and day compared to Omaha. That fortuitous mislanding into a less defended sector, it significantly reduced the immediate resistance they faced, giving them a crucial early advantage. Within just an hour of landing, those U.S. Army engineers, highly effective and facing less fire, had cleared obstacles and neutralized the immediate German defenses, ensuring much safer passage for the follow-up waves.
Right.
This rapid clearance, combined with the successful pre-landing airborne operations that had already secured the causeways and key inland objectives, allowed troops to move off Utah Beach relatively quickly. It prevented the kind of deadly bottleneck and pileup of troops that occurred on Omaha.
And that momentum was crucial, wasn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
By noon, the seaborne forces had successfully linked up with elements of the 101st Airborne Division, who had fought hard to secure their inland positions. And by late afternoon, significant progress had been made, pushing several miles inland towards the key objective of Cherbourg.
Were there still challenges at Utah?
Oh, certainly. There were persistent challenges. The flooded marshlands behind the beach presented significant obstacles to movement, funneling troops onto those causeways where they could be ambushed. There were fierce German counterattacks inland against the airborne positions, particularly around Carentan later, and the engineers still faced difficulties building roads through the dunes and marsh without heavy equipment arriving quickly. But overall, the progression at Utah was much, much smoother and faster than at Omaha.
So this allowed for a more rapid consolidation to the beachhead.
Exactly, and the commencement of the drive towards Cherbourg, their primary strategic objective for that sector. This swift decision-making on the ground by leaders like Roosevelt, coupled with the effective coordination between seaborne and airborne forces, and that rapid obstacle clearance by the engineers. It allowed American forces to really capitalize on their initial advantage. This ability to adjust plans quickly, maintain offensive tempo, and integrate the different combat elements effectively was decisive in preventing the Germans from regrouping and mounting a strong, cohesive defense right at the beach. So again, it highlights how important flexible leadership and rapid adaptation are when faced with the unpredictable nature of combat. And when does a mistake actually turn into a strategic opportunity? Utah is a prime example. #TAG-V, the human cost and enduring legacy. #A, casualties and psychological impact.
The grim statistics, they tell part of the story, but they can never fully convey the sheer human cost of that single day. By the end of D-Day, June 6th, Allied assault troops across all 5 Normandy beaches had suffered over 10,300 casualties that's killed, wounded, and missing,
10,000 in one day.
with approximately 2,400 of those occurring on Omaha Beach alone. These were losses that would just reverberate through communities, through families, for generations to come.
And the physical and psychological toll on the survivors. It was immense, a burden many would carry visibly or invisibly for the rest of their lives. Veterans like Daniel McBride, the paratrooper we mentioned, recalled that for the first 4 or 5 days after landing, everything was like a kaleidoscope. Just a blur characterized by constant movement, biting cold, persistent hunger, unending wetness, and pervasive gnawing fear. Yet despite this unending horror, they simply had to keep going. There was no other option.
The sheer scale of death and destruction left an indelible mark. Some veterans remembered seeing so many dead it was very difficult, requiring medics like Charles Shea to actively clear my mind from everything, what I was seeing, and do the work that I was trained to do.
He speaks to this incredible, almost superhuman mental fortitude just to function.
Yeah, compartmentalization on an extreme level. And the pervasive danger didn't magically end when the sun set on June 6th. It continued relentlessly for days and weeks after the initial landings. Constant shelling, sniper fire, vicious hedgerow fighting, and the ever-present feeling that, as one soldier put it, the law of average is going to catch up with you at any moment. There was no true safety, even after the beachhead was secured.
So what does it take for the human spirit to endure and function amidst such overwhelming, sustained horror, where every single moment could genuinely be your last? That experience fundamentally reshaped who these men were. #, be success amidst sacrifice.
But despite the horrible waste of war, as veterans often called it, and the profound human cost, the D-Day invasion was unequivocally a success. There's really no historical debate about that fundamental point, is there?
No, none at all. And its historical significance is absolutely undeniable. It established that critical and ultimately enduring beachhead in Nazi-occupied Europe. It laid the essential foundation for the liberation of France just months later and the eventual Allied victory on the Western Front less than a year later.
It was the beginning of the end of the West.
It really was. It was the pivotal moment, the opening of that second front that Stalin had so long demanded. And it fundamentally changed the course of World War II, accelerating the final defeat of Nazi Germany. The courage, the determination, the sacrifice displayed by the American G.I.s and all the Allied soldiers on that fateful day, they are rightly remembered as part of one of the greatest, most dramatic, most consequential events in modern history. A sacrifice that truly helped preserve freedoms for future generations.
So as you reflect on D-Day, it's worth thinking about how the sacrifices of that single brutal day, borne by countless individual acts of courage, continue to echo in the freedoms and the world order we know today. #outro.
Yeah.
Well, this deep dive into just a single day in the life of an American GI on D-Day. It's been a journey through immense challenge and incredible perseverance. We've traced it from the debilitating physical and psychological strain they endured before they even got to the battle, through the shocking reality of those ramp drops in the killing zones, to the stark contrast between Omaha's hard-won, bloody advances and Utah's somewhat fortuitous success. It was a day that truly revealed the raw, the resilient, sometimes the desperate core of the human experience in modern warfare.
And it leaves us with some enduring lessons, doesn't it? The unpredictable nature of warfare, how even the best laid plans can just crumble in an instant, the crucial role of adaptability and improvisation in the face of chaos, the incredible synergy required of combined arms, air, sea, land, airborne working together, and above all, the extraordinary human endurance and profound courage demonstrated by ordinary soldiers facing just unimaginable adversity.
This deep dive into D-Day really leaves us with a powerful question, I think. Beyond the grand strategies and the military hardware, what unseen internal forces is it that primal will to survive? Loyalty to your comrades, an unwavering sense of duty. What drives individuals to overcome their deepest fears and perform their duty when every fiber of their being must be screaming otherwise?
And perhaps, building on that, what can we learn about that critical balance between meticulous planning and the necessity of immediate, on-the-spot adaptation? Not just on the battlefield, but maybe in the unforeseen challenges and the unexpected landings we all face in our own lives when our own carefully laid plans inevitably go awry.
We encourage you to reflect on these profound insights and perhaps delve further into the countless